Okay, welcome to my home. Today we'll be having our hopefully second lecture about the character and values education. So last time, remember, we talked about what character is, what personality is. Okay, please everybody shut down your voices. Thank you. Okay, now, last time we talked about character, what character is, what morality is, what personality and values are. So let's first remember this definition about character. So character is the moral personality as defined by values. So we refer to the multiple self-aspects framework in social psychology. And remember, I talked about we have different social aspects, and each social aspect is associated with a different value priority. So our character is our personality, our moral personality, which is defined by our values. And at the end of the last hour, remember, I talked about the definition of education, and I gave you a homework, a voluntary homework, so that you can work on. So I asked you to try to define what character and values education is. Now, this is my definition, depending on how I framed the definitions of different concepts relevant to this course. So what is character and values education then? So character and values education is a purposeful activity planned for the optimum development of an individual's potential to acquire a character which is defined by values. And this process is expected to enable the person to decide and willfully choose to do the right thing at the expense of other personal goals and regardless of the costs associated with it. And what's the purpose of such kind of decision making and behaving? The purpose is that a code of conduct becomes manifest, which protects the fairness and welfare of the people that the individual interacts with. So character and values education is about thinking about others, protecting their welfare, being fair to ourselves and to the other people, and behaving in the best possible manner so that no one receives harm. And most importantly, character and values education aims at cultivating in the individual to choose, to willfully choose the right thing to do, no matter it serves personal goals or no matter it has costs associated with this choice. So this is the formal definition which I recommend for the definition of this course. Now, keeping this in mind, now let's move on to the to today's topic, which is the philosophical roots. So today's lecture will be about the philosophy of education and the point of views of different philosophers or philosophical approaches to how character education must be followed and why. So there are some philosophical problems which are posed by different philosophers about character education. So these problems are questions about what we should do. So for instance, how should we bring up our children is one question. What kind of individuals should we raise? What qualities should they have? What kind of personalities should they have? What values and character qualities should we cultivate in them? So in asking this question was answered differently by different philosophers, as we will see shortly. Some philosophers focused on valuables applicable to everybody, everyone, whereas some others focused on values of certain dominant groups or worldviews, whereas others focused on values of the immediate society or universal values. So what should we teach is a major philosophical question. And somebody believed that we should teach values or virtues or character qualities that should be found in everyone, or we should teach values of certain dominant groups or worldviews. Some believed values of the immediate society, the traditional values, should be taught, and others believed that there should be some universal values that should be cultivated in the individual. And finally, there are different methodologies proposed by different philosophers, which is the philosophical problem, as I stated here, how should values education be done? So basically, we will focus on the answers of these questions as proposed by different philosophers or schools of philosophy. Today, we will focus on idealism, realism, spiritualism, naturalism, pragmatism, and existentialism as philosophical schools. And each one of them has a different point of view for the individual, for the nature of knowledge and how knowledge can be acquired. And they propose different ways of educating the individual in terms of character development. Okay, let's get started with idealism. By the way, I'd strongly recommend that you use the links that I provide in the slides. For instance, plato.stanford.edu is a link for an encyclopedia of philosophy. You might find many different entries in it, and you might like to read them. So I'd strongly recommend them. I use them for the definition of the philosophical approaches. So what is idealism? Idealism is about the nature of existence. So according to idealism, something mental is the ultimate, the final foundation of all reality. And actually it is exhaustive of reality. So according to idealism, it is our mind which defines the reality. So there is no reality other than our mind. So this mental thing can be the mind, the spirit, the reason, which is akıl, or the will, irade, which defines what reality is. And according to idealism, although the existence of something independent of the mind can be accepted, in other words, something can exist no matter there is a mind to perceive it, everything that we can know about this mind-independent reality is somehow bound to the activities of the mind. In other words, things exist as they are in the nature, but things become perceivable, understandable by the faculties of the mind. These faculties are creative, formative, constructive activities, as idealism puts it. So what are these faculties of the mind? It is our thinking, it's our reasoning, it's sensation, perception, it's our memory processes. So all psychological processes help us to make sense of the reality. But this reality, the physical reality, exists no matter there is someone to perceive it. So just think about such an issue. So suppose you are listening to me in a certain room of your home, okay? But there are other rooms in your room as well. Although you are in one room, there are still other rooms which you do not perceive now, but they do exist, no matter you perceive them or not. So idealism believes that reality exists regardless of how our mind puts it. So everything exists independent of human mind, but everything can be known through mental faculties such as reason, akıl. So we can come to perceive and understand everything through thinking, but things exist as they are. These are called ideas, okay? That's why the name is idealism. So what is character education according to idealism? In idealism, morality is important, and important in the sense that the character education should cultivate the right or wrong, the good or bad in individuals. And individuals should question their lives and arrive at virtues, erdemler, virtues as an outcome of this reasoning. So through thinking, we can find what is right or wrong, what is good or bad. And according to idealism, there are universal values which should be protected and transferred to the generations. And a search for truth is encouraged. So finding the truth is important in idealism. And finding the truth requires that the self-actualization of the students becomes the ultimate goal. So finding truth is the ultimate goal for actualizing our own potential. Now, in these two thought clouds here, okay? So these are thought clouds, okay? You see two Latin phrases. Quid est veritas? What is the truth? That's the Latin question that is asked to find the truth. and also noce te ipsum, which is know thyself. These are two important principles in the early philosophy: finding the truth and knowing oneself, knowing yourself. So this is especially emphasized in the teachings of Socrates. And according to Socrates, the fundamental, the most important value that a person should acquire is knowing oneself. So knowing yourself is the most important virtue or value, if you like, according to Socrates. Therefore, values education should start with, or as a process of getting a person to know himself or herself. So what should we teach to our students? We should teach them the ways or the methods of knowing themselves. And according to Socrates, there are some basic values or virtues. These are temperance, ölçülü olmak, having friends, working for social benefit, and obeying the laws. So what's temperance? Let's define it hereby. Temperance refers to restraint, kendini engelleme, sınır koyma, the practice of self-control, or avoidance of indulgence and annoying others, and balancing the desires. As you observe, temperance being the most important virtue in the philosophy of Socrates, it refers to protecting the welfare of others by restraining our own actions. And all virtues both benefit others and the self in return. So having these four basic virtues does not only serve to protect the welfare of others, but they also serve in return as a result of our own actions. They help to benefit ourselves. We become good people, in other words, or virtuous people, erdemli insanlar. Now, this is an important point in the early philosophy, knowing oneself. Now, let's ask this question: is it possible? Is it possible to know oneself? Why is it possible? And if it is not, why not is it possible? So, I would like to refer to our social psychology courses about knowing oneself or self-knowledge. I inserted 3 slides for our students who did not take the social psychology course from me. Let's remember, is it the answer to the question, is it possible to know ourselves? Yes, it's possible, but here the question is it possible to know ourselves truthfully, validly? Is it possible to know ourselves objectively as who we really are? Now, in answering these questions, 2,000 years later, social psychologists identified 3 important motivations to know ourselves. Let's remember them. The first one is self-enhancement, kendini yüceltme, or enhancement motive, which is defined as the motivation to define oneself in positive terms. We would like to define ourselves in positive terms. We would like to think that we are intelligent, we are hardworking, we are sociable, we are capable, able people, okay? Nobody would call himself a liar. Nobody would call himself an unintelligent person. So we have such kind of a positive definition tendency. And this tendency is such a motivation that no matter our definition, our positive definition might fit our existing self-schema, or it is accurate, true, we choose to define ourselves positively. So this is the most important motive in defining ourselves, such that it leads us to the so-called positivity bias, which is defined as people's defining themselves by claiming positive and denying negative attributes. So I call myself an intelligent person, a smart person, but I don't want to define myself as an unintelligent person. So I use more positive qualities and less negative qualities to define myself. Is it possible now? The question is, philosophically, is it possible to know yourself accurately if you have a bias towards defining yourself positively? Okay. And as an extension to the positivity bias, remember that we have the so-called better than average effect. What is it? People believe they have more positive and less negative attributes or qualities than average comparison others. So in other words, I believe I'm more intelligent than an average person, and I am less lazy than an average person. So this makes myself defined in a better than an average other person. Again, the question is it possible to know ourselves accurately if we attribute positive qualities to ourselves and attribute more negative qualities to others? So why do we have these qualities? Because they provide us self-esteem. They makes us feel valuable about ourselves. And the second motive is the so-called self-verification or consistency motive. Kendini doğrulama, tutarlılık motivasyonu. What is it? Individuals are motivated to define themselves as it fits to their existing self-knowledge. So suppose I believe I'm an intelligent person, and no matter other people tell me about my level of intelligence, I keep on thinking that I'm an intelligent person. This is the positive sort of defining oneself. What about the negative attributes? So suppose I believe I'm a lazy person. No matter somebody says you are a very hardworking person, I would reject this feedback and keep on believing that I am a lazy person. So this is a motivation to keep the consistency of our existing self-definitions. Now again, is it possible to know ourselves truthfully, accurately, if we are trying to maintain the consistency of our self-definitions? And no matter this definition is positive or negative, or it is accurate, we still keep on thinking in the old ways that we defined ourselves once. And there is a single phenomenon that we know as cognitive affective crossfire when people with negative self-views, suppose I believe I'm lazy, receive negative feedback about themselves. Suppose you tell me you're a lazy person. So it fits to my existing self-view. I believe I'm lazy, and you say you're lazy. So when people with negative self-views receive negative feedback about themselves, they think that the feedback is accurate. Now, the truthfulness of the self-knowledge then is defined by whether it fits to my existing self-views. And what's the result? This is the cognitive side. This is a decision made about the nature of ourselves. But what's the affective experience about it? We experience negative affect. If I believe I'm lazy, and somebody says, yes, you're lazy, and I say, yes, okay, I'm lazy, then I'd feel bad about myself. So in character education then, we should be careful about how our students will feel about themselves when they receive negative feedback. Okay, this is an important point. And finally, there is the self-assessment or accuracy motive, which is defined as the motivation to define oneself accurately, truthfully, no matter it's positive or negative, no matter it fits our existing self-views. We would like to know the truth about ourselves. And remember the Kruger-Dunning effect or experiment, which is known as in Turkey, kifayetsiz muhteris, okay? According to their theory, we have certain skills to produce certain behaviors. We display certain levels of performance by using our skills. For instance, in this time, I'm using my verbal skills to communicate with you and to convey a message according to or relevant to the content of this course. So if I have, according to their theory, if I have sufficient amount of this skill, then I can use this skill to produce a performance such as lecturing now. And also when I'm asked, how is your verbal skills? I might be accurately define myself because I know what verbal skills are. But if I lack these skills, if I don't have the necessary skills to produce certain behaviors, which means I know what to do, I do not know what to do, then I can neither perform the task, lecture, nor can I evaluate myself accurately. Therefore, if somebody asks, how about your verbal skills? And I would say, I'm great at verbal skills, but actually I can't talk at all, speak at all, okay? So this is called the Kruger-Dunning effect. So what happens? If I lack the skill, I cannot evaluate myself truthfully. And then in the end, when I am asked to evaluate myself as compared to an average other person, I believe I have this skill more than the other person or other people or the comparison other have. So when I'm asked, as compared to an average instructor, what is the level of your verbal skills? And I would say I have very much the skill, but others do not have. So I would have a better than average effect. So it is not easy to know oneself accurately, because the most important motive that guides our self-knowledge is self-enhancement, meaning we want to define ourselves positively first. Second, then comes self-verification, which means we want to maintain our existing self-views, and only after that we can know ourselves truthfully. Now, keep these social psychological findings in mind, because I believe they will guide you in character and values education in your students. Okay, let's turn our attention to Plato now. Now, according to Plato, there is a class structure of the society. He divides society into three classes. Why is this important? Because it means there are three classes of people in the society, and each class should know how the members of this class should behave. According to Plato, the first class is the producers. The producers include all professions other than warriors and rulers. So craftspeople, esnaflar, el işi yapanlar, zanaatkarlar, merchants, doctors, artists, actors. So these are people of skills, of variety. They produce for the society. And according to Plato, in a just society, the producers have no share in ruling. They have no word to say about how the state should be governed, but they are expected to obey the rules or the laws put by or set by the rulers. So you see there is a hierarchy between producers and rulers. And they focus on producing whatever it is that they are best suited to produce. So producers should produce the best they can. The second class is called the auxiliaries. They are the warriors who are responsible for defending the city from invaders and keeping the peace at home. So they must enforce the convictions of the guardians or the rulers and ensure that producers obey these rules. And the third class is the guardians or the rulers. They are responsible for ruling the city, and they are choosing among the ranks of the auxiliaries, the warriors, and are also known as philosopher kings. So there are three classes in this society, and then Plato defines four basic virtues or values. Temperance is the first one, which refers to restraint of actions or self-control, avoiding indulgence and annoying others, and balancing the desires. And according to Plato, each class should follow a different virtue. So temperance is the virtue or value which must be followed by the producers. They should be temperate, in other words. They should be educated to control their desires so that they can excel, become professional at their professions, and produce the best they can. So according to Plato's point of view, each virtue serves for the goals of a given class, which would benefit the society. Producers should also emphasize industry, hardworking, and obedience to the rulers so that the social fabric is protected. The second virtue is courage, which refers to the strength, endurance, and the ability to confront fear, uncertainty, and intimidation. So it must be followed by the auxiliaries, the warriors. They should be courageous. They should be educated hard to be ruthless against foes or enemies, and kind and generous towards the citizens. So their education includes physical and military training, mathematics, and music. And warriors should also emphasize patience and endurance to accomplish difficult tasks. So the third virtue is wisdom, which refers to the ability to perceive the appropriate course of action to be taken in a given situation at the appropriate time. So perceive the circumstances correctly, choose the appropriate course of action correctly, and in this given situation, you apply this specific decision with your behaviors right at the time. This is called wisdom. And it must be followed by the guardians or rulers, the philosopher kings, in other words. They should be educated, therefore, for a long period of time to learn making the right decisions which require knowledge. Education of the rulers, therefore, should include philosophy, literature, edebiyat, history, maths, and musics. And guardians, therefore, the rulers, should also acquire patience, intelligence, memory, concentration, and these important faculties are acquired through math education. Okay, so mathematics is important for the ruler class. So as you see, different classes are assigned different virtues so that the social fabric is protected. And finally, the fourth virtue, according to Plato, is justice. It's the most important virtue, and Plato defines justice as behaving fairly to other people, and it must be followed by all classes. So what's justice for the producers? Justice for the producers is to produce the best they can. So what's justice for the warriors? Justice for the warriors is to protect the homestead to their lives. So what is justice for the rulers? It is giving the right decisions to govern the city or the state. And an individual can be fair to himself or herself, therefore, if he or she knows himself or herself. So knowing oneself is important here. This is sort of equivalent to knowing your place, actually. So as a producer, you shouldn't try to become a ruler. As a warrior, you shouldn't produce something. As a philosopher king, you shouldn't produce or protect the city. So everybody, every member of each class should know their place, haddini bilecek, in terms of the virtues assigned to them. So one criticism perhaps might be for Plato's thought is that there are classes in the society, and this is a very elitist approach. There is no permeability, geçişkenlik, between the classes. And actually, although character education is important in Plato's thought, there is no right of education for slaves, for instance. Slaves do not have the opportunity to have any education. So let's move on to realism. So what's realism? According to realism, it's about being real. Everything exists as they have certain properties. So moon is round, for instance. Moon exists as some celestial body having the quality or property of being round. Or trees have branches. So trees exist as having branches or bearing fruits. And this existence is independent of the human mind that perceives it, or it is independent of the language we use to describe these things. So in other words, there is an apple in the nature, but apple exists as apple, no matter we call it apple or elma, or no matter we do not have any word to identify what it is. So existence in itself physically is a reality, hence realism. And human beings, according to realism, are intelligent and social entities, and being intelligent, they can reason and have the knowledge of truth. Intelligence means thinking, understanding, and finding the truth, in other words. And secondly, being social, human beings should live in a moral system because people live together and they should survive together. So they should protect the welfare of others as well. And reason helps individuals to know and figure values and live accordingly. So through thinking, we find our values according to realism. And through thinking, as we find these values for ourselves, we should live up to our own important values. Character and values education, therefore, should aim at finding the universal values applicable to all, in other words, and transmitting them to new generations. And children must be educated to use their reason to discover the values or to discover their values. In this point of view, as you observe, there are not previously assigned values to different classes or different people. People have reason and they can find their own values, but these values should be universal, applicable to all. And values education, therefore, is a means to shape children's behaviors. Now, we find Aristoteles in realism defining the character education. According to Aristoteles, virtue, erdem, is finding and preferring the middle position. So, a virtuous person is someone who avoids extremes in behavior, okay? He should or she should find the middle position. Thus, virtue is the set of all values which guides the person to behave in good manners. So what is good manners? Being in the middle position, not on the extremes. And virtue, according to Aristoteles, is not inborn. It is acquired, learned through reason and experience. And he identifies two types of virtues that are intellectual and ethical virtues. Intellectual virtues are related to reason and they are acquired through education, such as wisdom and fine arts, whereas ethical values are related to pleasure and pain experiences, and it's about controlling human nature through reason. So the function of the mind is to control our carnal animal nature, okay? And these virtues to control through reason are pleasure, pain experiences, or our impulses are courage, charity, wisdom, temperance, justice, magnanimity, and witness. Now, let's move on to identifying these middle states, okay? The middle state between. So, middle state means mean, the average, okay? İtidal, orta yol, okay? So, if a person is on the low extreme, which is called a deficiency, eksiklik, kusur, this is a negative value. Keep this in mind. This is a negative value. And if the person is on the other extreme, in excess, fazlalık, then this is another negative value. So the average position, the mean of these two extremes defines the middle position, which is a virtue. So courage, for instance, is the middle state between cowardice and recklessness. Okay, you can find the Turkish equivalents in this book. Remember, this is your Turkish textbook, okay, in page 250. So, cesaret, korkaklıkla atılganlık, delice atılganlık arasındaki orta yol. So, this is the major formula, let's say. So, charity, cömertlik, is the middle state between miserliness, cimrilik, and wastefulness, savurganlık, and so on and so forth. So as you observe, each virtue is defined by two extremes, being in the middle of two extremes. Okay. So ignorance is one extreme, cehalet, pedantry, bilgiçlik is another extreme, and wisdom is the middle point. I would recommend that you examine this website here, okay? Let me show you this website. This is the Wikipedia entry for Aristotle's book, so-called Nicomachean Ethics. In this book, he defines these 7 virtues and the extremes and the middle way very well. And okay, observe that courage is a virtue which is concerned with our emotions, fear or confidence. Fear, the one extreme, confidence, the other extreme, okay? So courage, if somebody does not have courage, it means that this person is coward. And if the person have very much in excess courage, this person is foolhardy, fearless, excessively fearless, irrational, or rash, who is very confident, who acts very quickly without thinking, no matter he would survive or not. So if you examine this entry in Wikipedia, you would observe that each virtue is related to certain emotional states and its deficiency and excess is identified. So this is just a recommendation so that you can get into details of this theory. Okay, I'll go on in a few moments. Here we go. So So please go through your Turkish textbook to understand each one of these virtues. But here again, what we observe in Aristoteles is that he's trying to identify some basic and perhaps universal virtues or values, and he tries to theorize what a virtue is and how it functions in terms of extremes that is related to this virtue. Therefore, character education should aim at educating the individual to have the middle state between two extremes. So in Aristoteli's thought, there are certain steps in character education. First of all humans have a natural tendency towards the good and excellence. We are born with a tendency to be good, to be excellent in our actions. So this is sort of a premise. And the child's intellectual and character development is guided by external forces. So we have some inborn capacities, but towards the good. But in order that these inborn capacities can become real in our or manifest in our behaviors, there should be external forces. In other words, the family, the society, or the teachers to guide the children's character development. And he identifies 4 steps in character education. One, it's the recognition or perception state. First of all, the child should perceive what is good. This requires that the child observes some models. Therefore, family and society or different socializing agents become important because the children will observe their behaviors to understand, to learn what is good or what is bad. The second step then is imitation, taklit. So once the child perceives what's right or wrong, then he or she starts to behave similar to the social agents in whom he or she observed these good or bad behaviors. And then comes the state of habituation. This is not alışkanlık, alışma. This is to learn something or to learn a behavior to produce it continually. This is called habituation. And once the behavior becomes habitual, once the child learns to behave in good manners, first knowing them, then imitating them, once the child learns to behave consistently in good manners, then comes the reasoning about these behaviors. Okay? So these are the 4 steps that Aristoteles identifies in character education. Now, before we move on to spiritualism, I would like to give a break here so that you can ask your questions. I will be back in 5 minutes. Please do not leave the room.